When it comes to theories about the economy or politics or the best way to build a nuclear power plant, you may not be an expert. In fact, when it comes to these topics and many others, you may have no interest in theories at all. But chances are you've developed some theories about communication, and you're not alone. It's almost elemental to the human condition that we all theorize about ways to share our ideas with others, how to be heard and understood, and how to be persuasive, how to get what we want. We are all communication theorists. We just don't all theorize the same way. In this video, we present 3 perspectives to help you distinguish between various theories of communication. Our perspectives are broad, intentionally so, but on a basic level, they help us understand and interpret the world. You might think of these theories as neighborhoods on a map. Each neighborhood shares the same ground, the same terrain, but each neighborhood represents a unique community with different patterns for what to expect, how to relate, and how to live our lives. We want you to be comfortable in all 3 neighborhoods. Each one has value, and they all share much in common. Yet, just as different neighborhoods offer different types of houses, these neighborhoods offer different types of communication. We borrow our approach from Richard Lanham, an expert on strategies to improve the teaching and learning of writing. In his essay, The Domain of Style, Lanham says that whatever theory of communication we hold will influence how we write and what we say. Aided by Lanham's work, we'll visit 3 neighborhoods, each representing a distinct approach to word communication. Better yet, we'll visit 2 houses per neighborhood, so we can get an even better idea of how these communities function. The problem is we haven't had time to arrange our map properly. We know what houses to visit, but we're not sure where they belong. Fortunately, each house offers a clue. Several houses include books written by Lanham. Others include historical documents, poems, and even some cool pop culture artifacts. By the end of the tour, we'll sort out the houses and get to know each neighborhood pretty well. In the first house, we find one of Lanham's books in which he describes one of the most common theories of communication. That theory goes by many names. We'll call it the authentic theory of communication. According to this theory, good communication should not interfere with ideas in any way. Good communication should only transmit our ideas, free of distortion or manipulation. This theory leaves no doubt about what counts as good writing. Consider how Lanham characterizes this theory's approach towards prose. He says, prose ought to be maximally transparent and minimally self-conscious, never seen and never noticed. For another example of the authentic theory of communication, let's visit the second house. Inside, there's an historical note about 2 engineers named Claude Shannon and Warren Weaver. In the 1940s, Shannon and Weaver were engineers working for Bell Labs, trying to improve the science of communication. Their goal was to help people communicate their messages by telephone and radio with as little interference or distortion as possible. Success meant that a message arrived intact, undamaged by the transmission process. By their standard, good communication should always be clear, concise, and trustworthy. And that standard still makes sense today. That is, unless you like dropped calls or garbled messages. That's why Shannon and Weaver's approach epitomizes the authentic theory of communication. Hopefully, when you see other examples of this approach, you can recognize the neighborhood where they belong, a community of theories that are unified by their search for authentic human communication. But what if what you say derives less from who you are and more from who you're with? That sort of question invites us to visit another neighborhood on our tour, a community of ideas we'll call the reflective theory of communication. How does this approach work? Well, let's visit the third house to find out. Inside, there's some more of Richard Lanham's writing. You see, Lanham is interested in all 3 neighborhoods, and his books offer insight on each one. To illustrate the reflective approach, Lanham quotes from George Herbert Mead, a social psychologist who proposed that being human is more than our ability to be true to ourselves. To be human, he said, is to contain multitudes, to carry with us the collected voices of others, of social norms and expectations, of common cultural values. This theory holds that we are less the authors of our messages than we'd otherwise presume, that our messages, our thinking, even our senses of self, are less like packets to be transmitted and more like conversations shared by many different people. Quoting from the book Mind, Self, and Society, we learn from this theory that a person's ability to integrate the broad activities of any given social whole or organized society is the essential basis and prerequisite of the fullest development of that individual's self. That's a lot to take in. Want another example? Well, let's drop by the fourth house. Inside, there's a snippet of poetry on the dining room table, 2 lines written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Each to each a looking glass reflects his figure that doth pass. In those lines, Emerson proposes that people can be like mirrors to each other, that we define ourselves by what we see in those reflections. Such a reflective approach can have a profound impact on our lives. Consider how a reflective attitude might alter how you write, and for whom. Get to know this neighborhood well. The residents of this place don't always see eye to eye, but they all agree on the value of studying human communication as social construction. Still, there are plenty of folks in a nearby neighborhood who strive for a third way of communication, an approach that privileges the individual within the community and concentrates on how human identity is built rather than revealed. We'll call this perspective the artful theory of communication. To better understand this perspective, let's visit the fifth house. Inside, we'll find another excerpt from Richard Lanham's work, a unique perspective on writing that compares 2 different approaches to selling cars in the USA. Lanham begins his account with the story of Henry Ford, the pioneering automaker who sold cars as no-frills tools for transportation. Inspired by his vision, Ford engineers concentrated on the internal workings of their vehicles and generally ignored outer appearances. Ford was so dedicated to this philosophy that he promised you could buy a Ford in any color, so long as it's black. Compare this approach to General Motors President Alfred P. Sloan, who sold cars not just as tools, but as status symbols. Ford may have hatched an industry, but it was Sloan who launched a lifestyle. As Lanham tells it, the automotive industry, the great monument to the primacy of practical purpose, turns out to be driven by other motives as well, by social competition on the one hand, and pure decorative play on the other. The theory here is that people craft and revise their identities less from some deep, fundamental internal core, and more from a desire to influence how others see us. We mix and match ourselves in the manner that we shop, either for clothes or for cars. We're looking for options, not for consistency. We cobble our messages together from anything we can find, hoping to design ourselves into being. As a perspective on communication, the artistic theory enables us to craft messages for effect. This approach concentrates on the management of impression, the manipulation of signs, the search for power, not just over ourselves, but also over others. At the core of the artistic theory is the belief that personal style is something you can learn and cultivate. It is an art, like cooking. It is not something you're born with or simply know how to do, like breathing. It will come as little surprise that we find another example of the artistic theory on a television playing in the sixth house. It's Spongebob Squarepants, a character who has a great faith in his ability to help others realize their potential. In the episode Bubble Stand, SpongeBob and his pal Patrick open a bubble-blowing stand, much to the annoyance of their neighbor Squidward. For 25 cents, anyone can attempt to blow bubbles. And for another 25 cents, SpongeBob will even offer you lessons on how to blow bubbles. What is so hard about blowing bubbles that you need lessons? SpongeBob and Patrick aren't just blowing bubbles, SpongeBob explains. They are making bubble art. And, SpongeBob adds, it's all in the technique. That's not art, Squidward protests. That's just annoying. What could be more simple than blowing a stupid bubble? It turns out that blowing bubbles isn't as simple as Squidward assumes, though it seems that all you need to do is repeat one mechanical behavior. Squidward soon discovers there is more to it than that. Always eager to help out, SpongeBob shows Squidward his technique. Squidward's approach to blowing bubbles is like Henry Ford's approach to selling cars. All function and no style. But, like Alfred P. Sloan, SpongeBob proves that style matters. Moreover, he proves that style is something you can acquire. You just need to learn a little technique. In this video, we've taken a brief tour of a big place, a city of neighborhoods, each representing a unique community of thought. We've borrowed from Richard Lanham's essay, The Domain of Style, to illustrate an important principle, that any effort to communicate resides within a set of ideas and values, and that when we understand these perspectives, what we say and how we write can be more intentional. The goal isn't to select one perspective over all others, any more than we recommend that you live in one neighborhood and never visit others. Each perspective, authentic, reflective, and artistic, is a community of ideas worth visiting, and they all share common ground, a domain of our common humanity. So explore them all. The next step is to read and examine new theories, pop culture examples, and other artifacts from a vantage point of an intellectual cartographer, to practice being a mapper of ideas. Contemplate each new discovery in its own context. Explore its depths and reaches with patience and an open mind. But try also to add each new place to your own mind map, relating it to a neighborhood of ideas that constitute a coherent way to make sense of the world. As you do, you'll start building terrains that others may come to inhabit for themselves. After all, reading maps is pretty useful, but making them, well, that's fun.